the exploits of another legendary Texan, a gambler named Benny Binion, who became an icon here in Las Vegas, even though he did time in federal prison and admitted that he killed a couple of people along the way, maybe a whole bunch of people who dared to cross him or got in his way. Binion's Horseshoe is still operating in downtown Las Vegas, though the family no longer owns it. And its founder is more responsible than maybe any other person for the explosive growth in the poker industry, which has, become it's emerged from smoky card rooms to become a global multi-billion-dollar industry. Benny Binion did that, and we'll tell you how in just about a minute when I'm joined by Doug Swanson, whose new book, Blood Aces, The Wild Ride of Benny Binion, is immensely entertaining. So that's the plan. Welcome back. When Benny Binion died, Christmas Day, 1989, I remember thinking that someone should try to get his FBI file, use the Freedom of Information Act to see what's in his file now that he was gone. And so I did. A couple of weeks after he died, I filed this request with the FBI. It took, I think, close to 5 years to get that file. The FBI had told me I was the first guy to request it, and it took them a long time to pull all this material together. And as I recall, it was more than 500 pages of stuff. There were more pages that kept arriving for months afterward. But I always suspected there was more, and now we know there was more because investigative reporter Doug Swanson tracked it down as part of the research for his new book, Blood Aces, The Wild Ride of Benny Binion, which is getting rave reviews everywhere it's been read, and for good reason. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thank you, George. Happy to be here.
Terrific book. Why this one? Had you heard, as you're working the streets as a reporter in Texas, in Dallas, had you heard stories about Binion, or was he too far removed from Texas by the time you came along?
No, I've been around for a long time, and I used to cover police many years ago for the old Dallas Times-Herald, and when I would be at the police station late at night, we'd all be sitting around having coffee, and every now and then talk would come up about Benny Binion, and I just got interested in him that way.
Well, it's you can see why it's a great topic because your book is entertaining from top to bottom. There's a quote. One of the reviews had a quote in it, and it sort of matches my own feelings about Benny Binion. I got to meet him twice. I was there for one TV interview that was conducted by a friend of mine, and I got to know his sons, Jack and Teddy. There's a quote from one of these book reviews that says, his philanthropy combined with his endearing cornponery made him a beloved figure in the Valley, and it's hard to not like him, even as you read about his ruthlessness. That's sort of how you came around in your thinking about him, right?
Oh, I think so. I was surprised at the end of the process how much I liked the guy, even though he, as you mentioned earlier, did some pretty unsavory things in his life. At the end of all my research, I thought this is a guy who would be worth knowing.
The transformation is amazing. Where he started, what he did, and how he became such an icon here. I mean, beloved. I mean, people wept when he died.
Sure, and there are still people, and I'm running into them even now, who knew Benny and who were very loyal to him and still are loyal to him. He commanded a lot of respect, and I think he was probably the greatest friend you could have and the worst enemy you could have.
That's for sure. So start the tale. Give me the thumbnail sketch about how he started out. I think the phrase you use in the book is he came from nothing.
Sure. He was born in 1904 in a little town in North Texas called Pilot Grove, and it really was nothing. In fact, it burned down a few years after he was born. And when he was in second grade, before he had even learned to read or write, his dad, who was a traveling horse trader, took him with him, and they went out and bought and sold horses together. Soon after that, Benny fell in with roving tribes of gamblers. They would go from town to town and run dice games and card games in these little towns and fleece the local populace and then move on to the next town. And that's where he learned how to run a gambling house, out with these roving dice dealers, going from town to town in Texas.
He ends up in Dallas, where I guess he runs something called a policy game. What is that?
That's a lottery. It's a numbers game. He would send out his runners with little policy books. They would have 3 columns of numbers, and if you wanted to play the game, you'd pick 3 numbers, and then the runners, the bagmen, would take it back to the home office, and they'd have a drawing. Sometimes it was fixed, sometimes it wasn't, and maybe you could bet 10 cents and win $10. And back in the 1920s and 1930s, that might be some big money.
I remember seeing interviews with Benny and hearing him talk here in Las Vegas. He wasn't shy about saying he did some bad things. I mean, he wouldn't come out and spell it out, but he would say things like, "Well, I don't need to hire somebody to do killing. I can do my own killing." And there are folks who think that he probably killed a whole bunch of people. Do you have an idea how many?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Benny also used to say, "Tough times make tough people," and that was part of his credo. That's a good question. How many did he kill? He only admitted to killing two. One was a rival bootlegger. The other was a rival policy operator. But there were many other people who crossed Benny Binion or his operation and ended up dead. Maybe dozens. I don't know. It's really hard to get a count. But there certainly were people out there who made an enemy of Benny and didn't live long.
So what was he doing? Consolidating power, eliminating rivals?
Sure, that was doing both. He had in 1936 he started his dice operation, and he had dice games in most of the downtown hotels in Dallas. He was the king of that in the Dallas area, Dallas, Fort Worth, North Texas, and he did it two ways. He made powerful friends in the courthouse and in the police department and in the district attorney's office, and then he controlled his rivals. And by that, I mean he either took a percentage of their operation, or if they wouldn't cooperate, they ended up in a hole somewhere.
You write in the book that he was protected, meaning payoffs?
Oh, sure. I mean, the city became dependent on his payoffs. He at one point said he was giving more than $600,000 a year to the city of Dallas in bribes and payoffs. Now, it was laundered a little bit. They would have a show raid on one of his operations and have a fake arrest, and then his lawyer would go down to the courthouse and pay some fines, and some would go into the pockets of the officials and some would go into the government coffers. But that's the way it operated for many years here.
There was a rival named Herb Noble, and this guy had more lives than a cat. I mean, literally more lives than a cat. Tell me who he was and what happened to him.
He was a rival operator in the dice business here in Dallas, and he paid Binion his percentage. But allegedly, at one point, Benny said, "I want 25% of your operation," and Noble said, "No, that's not going to happen." And right after that, there ensued a series of attempts on Noble's life. People tried to shoot him. They tried to blow him up. He was a pilot, and they put nitroglycerin in the engine of his airplane. That blew up. But they always missed. It became, after a while, like Wile E. Coyote going after the Roadrunner.
But finally, what happened? I mean, it was like 11 times. Did they get him?
Yeah, what happened was Herbert Noble became so famous for these attempts on his life that he started getting lots of fan mail from around the world, and he really loved this mail. He would go out to his mailbox every day, every morning, to see what letters had come in that day. And, if you're a hitman, even if you're an inept hitman, you see a pattern there. And so the assassins put a landmine under his mailbox, and so when he drove up to get his mail that day, they set it off, and that was finally the end. After 12 attempts, that was the end of Herbert Noble.
Nobody ever pinned it on Benny Binion. What's your suspicion?
Well, it's an open case. Still, it's never been solved. I mean, Binion's fingerprints were all over this. Everybody believes that it was a Binion's deal. And, at one point, Herbert Noble tried to get Binion. As I said, Herbert was a pilot, and the cops went out to his place one day, found him underneath his airplane, single-engine airplane, welding bomb racks onto the wings. He had 2 napalm bombs sitting there, and he had a map to Binion's house in his pocket. And his plan was to fly over the house out there on Bonanza Road in Las Vegas and drop 2 bombs on the house. So even Herbert believed Benny was after him.
I would imagine part of the problem in writing a book about Benny Binion is separating fiction from fact, because there's so many stories about him. There was Jack Binion told me in an on-camera interview one time that Benny met his future wife, Jack's mother. He was driving one day drunk in Dallas, and his car broke down in front of a church. And just as the church was letting out, and he somehow got into a fight, he with several people, pulled the bumper off the car and beat several people into submission. And and one of the people who witnessed this happen was Jack's future mom. And I guess you say in the book that that's one that probably didn't happen, at least not that way.
Yeah, you hear it told now sometimes, and it's 14 people who came after him,
That's
and
right.
he's standing there like Russell Crowe in The Gladiator,
Yeah.
knocking him down. And but you go back and look at the official reports, and what the reports say is that it was one middle-aged woman that he hit. So somewhere in there's the truth, but who knows?
You note that he moved from Dallas. He was feeling the heat in Texas, so he moved. He moved to Las Vegas, relocated his operation, and got into the casino business. It's hard to imagine Benny Binion leaving anywhere because of heat or, feeling pressured that he would back down to anybody.
Well, as I said, he owned the people at the courthouse. Unfortunately, he did not control the voters. And in 1946, they voted in a reform slate. So he lost his sheriff, and he lost his district attorney. And he was told, you either get out of town or you're going to be arrested or killed. So he loaded up his Cadillac with allegedly $1 million in the trunk. He took two guys with him. One of them was R.D. Matthews, a name that may mean something in Las Vegas.
Oh yeah.
They both had Tommy guns, and they drove Benny out to Las Vegas.
So describe Las Vegas at that time, kind of a wide open place in terms of opportunities here. You write in the book that it not only had the mob, it needed the mob.
Yeah, they showed up with capital, and they showed up with expertise. And this was, I think, right when modern Las Vegas was being born. This is when the Flamingo went up, and, Bugsy Siegel was involved in that. And there were others coming along in that period, and it was just starting to turn into what it would become. And Benny was right there with money and with good timing with all the rest of these guys. And they knew how to run casinos because they'd been running casinos all over the country. They've been running them illegally, but now they could do it in a lawful way.
Well, that's kind of the story of Las Vegas. All these guys with track records, with criminal records, bootleggers and gamblers who'd done all kinds of illegal stuff came here and got a second lease on life. It was sort of like the ethical car wash, somebody once said.
Yeah, well, Benny was right there with him. I mean, he was part of that wave, and I think his timing was impeccable. He had a lot of money. He knew how to run a game, and he fell right in with the best of them.
It was never clear here, even after he was gone, what his relationship with the actual mob was. I mean, people assume that he coexisted with the mafia, that there was interaction at times over the years. How would you describe it?
I think there was a working relationship that came and went. Now, when he was in Leavenworth for tax evasion in the middle 50s, the mob pretty much took over the horseshoe. Eddie Levinson and others were running the place and were skimming millions of dollars out of the place. Benny came back and was able to buy it back from them. I think he had some respect from the mob. I was talking to Doyle Brunson, the great poker player, in researching this book, and he told me a story about how he got in trouble with Tony the Ant, and Tony the Ant wanted to set up some cheating operation and wanted Doyle to cooperate, and Doyle wouldn't do it. Tony the Ant said he was going to kill him, and Doyle went to Benny and said, I need help, and Benny got Tony the Ant to back off. So that's the kind of power he had.
Wow. Tony the Ant, by the way, for the audience doesn't recognize that nickname, was Tony Spilatro, who was sort of the mob ambassador here in Las Vegas in the 70s and into the 80s. He was in the movie Casino. He was played by Joe Pesci, and he was a very feared and ferocious guy who is rumored to have killed about 22 people. So if Benny Binion could get him to back down, that's pretty amazing. What is not so amazing, if you know Binion, is that he opened a place and was a success. And if he was still in charge of it, it would probably still be a success. I mean, what was the secret to his management prowess?
Well, as you know, George, he didn't have bands there. He didn't have chorus girls. He didn't have comedians or ventriloquists. It was just a gambling joint. And if you wanted to gamble a whole bunch of money, that's where you went. He had great odds, and you could and go to the dice table, you go to the craps game, and put down the biggest bet you had, and Benny would accept it. I was after I wrote the book, I happened to be talking to Larry Gatlin, the country singer, who was a friend of Benny's, and he was telling me about sitting there at Benny's table in the restaurant one day, and somebody wanted to put down a bet of about $250,000, and the pit boss came running over to Benny and said, can I take this? And Benny said, hell, it's a gambling joint, ain't it? And that was just his philosophy.
There's a bigger story. It was like $700,000. A guy came in with two suitcases, one full and one empty, and he put it on the line and lost it. Yeah, that's I guess the motto is still, they use it in their advertising, good food, good whiskey, good gamble. That was something that Benny had said?
Yes, and he also said treat the little people like big people.
Welcome back. Doug Swanson, you're a seasoned reporter. How tough was it to get people to open up and talk about Benny Binion? And I ask that in this context, is that people are very protective of him and his story, his legend, his status in the community, even now.
Certainly, and not everybody wanted to talk about him, including some members of his family, but some people did open up surprisingly. I mentioned earlier R.D. Matthews, who was a Vegas figure for quite some time, and he was long said to be the toughest man in Dallas and was alleged to have been one of Benny's hitmen. Now, R.D. was still living when I was researching this book here in Dallas. I went out to his house. He was 91 years old. We sat beside his swimming pool for several hours and had a wonderful conversation. Now, many things he wouldn't talk about, but he did talk about a lot of stuff that happened. And it was the same with many people who knew Benny. Some were quite happy to talk about him. Some still won't.
Yeah, R.D. Matthews, I mean, man, even in his 80s, he struck fear into the hearts of people here when he was in town.
Well, I think he was a tough guy. You may know he got shot in the head once by a rival, and the bullet went into his eye and exited at his temple, and he got up and drove himself to the doctor. Now, if you get shot in the head and you drive yourself to the doctor, you're the toughest guy in town as far as I'm concerned.
And the eye patch he wore, it didn't hurt his image as a tough guy either.
Right.
Benny, you mentioned that a lot of people died who were rivals of Benny Binion. He got into a bit of a business dispute with a former FBI agent here, and bad things happened. Coulthard.
Yes. The gentleman Coulthard, Mr. Coulthard, was having a real estate dispute with Binion, and a few days later went out to his car there in the parking garage downtown, and then the car bomb went off and killed him. And this was not the first person who had crossed Benny Binion who died in a car bomb.
Any ideas, anything surface in the documents that you got about who his car bombers might have been, or whether they worked for Benny at all?
Well, as you may know, the police were looking at Binion for a while and never made the case. In the FBI documents, they made reference to a man named Jim Dolan, who was an old associate of Binion's, and they believed that he had done the bombing and then fled to Mexico. But they never could make a case for that either. Dolan was later killed in a drug deal gone bad in San Antonio, so his tale will never be told. But there was lots of suspicion that Binion was involved, but Benny said, I don't know who blowed him up, but I damn sure didn't. So that was the word from Benny.
I can't remember from the book, but do you ever see the name Tom Hanley in any of the documents, or run in anyone who had Hanley stories?
No, I don't remember that.
We'll have to have a conversation about that sometime. So in the how hard was it for you to get the FOIA stuff, the files? How many pages did you get? And as I said, I don't know if you heard in the introduction, I had filed one years ago too, and right after Benny died, but I never got some of the material that you got. So kudos.
Well, thank you, and I'm grateful to you because you paved the way. A lot of the stuff had already been processed, so I was able to get it in a hurry. But, the FBI takes its own sweet time on these things, and some of it was quite difficult. Some of it I had to patch together from other sources, such as the House Select Committee on Assassinations that compiled a bunch of documents. Some of it I'm still waiting for. I'm still waiting for the bulk of Ted Binion's FBI file, which runs to thousands of pages. All I've received so far are about 200 pages, and who knows what's in that thing.
Thousands of pages, wow.
Oh. Sure.
And in the FOIA documents, I can remember when they first arrived, going through them really fast and laughing at this designation that they had for Binion. They called him, quote, top hoodlum, which is not a phrase you've heard in a long time. Tell me about some things that you saw in there that might have surprised you.
Well, I think what was really amusing was the way that they tried to stake out Binion's house for a while. Now, you know what it's like out there on Bonanza Road. It's not too easy for an FBI agent to hide out there. And so the kids were laughing at them. Hank Greenspun sent out some reporters to expose them. They tried to chase Benny cross-country when he drove from Las Vegas to Texas. They lost him several times, and Benny thought it was all a lark. In many cases, and he was making fun of the agent. So part of the surprise was that the Bureau was so inept. But the bigger surprise, I think, was what you mentioned earlier, that Benny, according to the FBI documents, became an FBI informant in 1960.
Do you have any idea what he may have told him?
I don't think he told him anything all that valuable, at least according to the documents I saw. I think he gave them some information when people were in town or there was a low-level criminal drifting around, that sort of thing. But what J. Edgar Hoover wanted out of Binion was information on who was skimming from the casinos. And I saw no evidence in the records that I got that he ever gave them any information about that.
Um, so he might have cut some sort of a deal to maybe get out of prison earlier or have an easier deal. And yeah, I'll tell you what I whatever I find out, and then just didn't find out anything that was useful for him.
Well, and this is the way Benny always worked. He got powerful people on his side. I mean, when he was in Dallas, he had the sheriff on his side, and there in Las Vegas, he manages to get the special agent in charge on his side. That all changed later when Joseph Yablonsky came to town and started running the FBI. As you know, that reversed it entirely. But for a while, he had the top man for the FBI in his pocket.
Some of those documents show that Hoover was looking at this himself, right? He was looking at Benny Binion, reading this stuff himself.
You can see the handwritten notes from J. Edgar Hoover on these documents. In fact, you can see him getting more and more frustrated as the FBI fails to pull off its surveillance. But it's not just Hoover. It goes up to the Attorney General of the United States at the time, and then up to the White House, to Harry S. Truman. There are memos in these files that show that Harry S. Truman was giving the Attorney General and FBI Director Hoover advice on how to pursue Benny Binion.
Your theories on that? Why would Truman pay any attention to that?
Well, there was a scandal in what was then called the Bureau of Internal Revenue, later the IRS, and they had some agents who were shaking down citizens and taking bribes and payoffs. So Truman and the Attorney General wanted to show that they'd gone straight and they were out doing business and going after the bad guys. So they were after Binion as a PR move.
Let's talk about what Binion did. I mean, not only did he run a successful business downtown, but he did a lot of bigger stuff that the impact is still being felt in Las Vegas. One was poker. Tell me the story, what he contributed to the poker and the growth of poker.
Sure. In 1969, he and his son went up to Reno to attend something called the Texas Gamblers Reunion, and that was a little poker game at a hotel there, at a casino there. They had assembled some of the great players from the poker underground, like Johnny Moss, Buggy Pearson, Sailor Roberts, Doyle Brunson, and they played poker. And it was supposed to be a kind of an attraction to bring some people into the casino. It didn't quite work out all that well, but Binion had an idea. He thought, well, why don't we bring these people to the Horseshoe? We'll have them play some games, and that way maybe I can draw some people in to watch them play, and then these people will go over to their tables and lose their money there. It was a publicity stunt that he started in 1970. He never thought it would grow beyond, maybe 50 to 75 players, but look where it is today.
Yeah, it became the World Series of Poker, and it's thousands and thousands of players now.
Sure. Moved away from the Horseshoe, and I think I know they need to make money and they want to bring in lots of players, but I went to the World Series of Poker back in the early 1980s at the Horseshoe, and I just loved that atmosphere. That sort of down at the heels, smoky, smells like old beer, bunch of guys sitting around with polyester clothes and long sideburns dealing cards.
Absolutely. I covered a couple of times in those same years, and it just seemed like it belonged there. And now it's too darn respectable.
Right. But, it got big, and, boy, the money is huge.
And then rodeo, National Finals Rodeo. Binion played a pretty big role in bringing that to town.
Sure, he brought that to town. I mean, Benny loved horses and cowboys and the rodeo. He had a big ranch up in Montana. He just loved horses. And, anytime any broken down rodeo rider would come through the Horseshoe, Benny would comp him a meal and maybe slip him some chips or a little bit of cash. He just loved cowboys, and bringing the rodeo to town was a big deal for him.
And then, of course, now it's a multi-million-dollar event, sort of like the World Series of Poker has become so big. I'll throw out some names that you cover in the book, and you can give me sort of a capsulization about how they connect to Benny Binion. Clyde Barrow, Bonnie and Clyde.
Yes, Binion, back in the 1930s, had a share of a big casino between Dallas and Fort Worth called Top of Hill Casino. and it was almost raid-proof because it was on top of the hill, hence the name, and they had a guard shack down below. And when the cops would show up to raid them, their alarm would go off, the gamblers would escape through tunnels, and the dealers would fold up the tables like Murphy beds, and by the time the cops got into the casino, the dealers would be standing there with a hymnal singing hymns, so acting like it was a church service. So this place went on for years like this, attracted a huge crowd. Celebrities would come out, Buster Keaton, Howard Hughes would be out there. And I was talking to a dancer who used to dance out there back in the 30s named Willie, and she remembers she was dancing with a troupe called the Texas Rockets. She looked across the floor one day and saw Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow standing there watching her dance. And then when Clyde was shot dead in Louisiana, they had his funeral here in Dallas, and Benny chartered a plane, came in low over the funeral, and dropped a wreath on Clyde's grave.
Mo Dalitz.
Well, he and Benny were big friends, and Mo had his own problems, with his past, mob allegations and affiliations. But he and Benny turned out to be very close friends, and there's a picture in the book taken at Binion's Montana Ranch, and it's Steve Wynn, Benny Binion, Ted Binion, and Mo Dalitz out there on the ranch.
Steve Wynn worshipped Benny Binion. I've got a photo of them in my house. It's he learned a lot from him. Says he learned a lot at his knee. Yeah,
I think so. And Binion's daughter Brenda, who talked to me for the book, had some great shots of Wynn hanging out around the horseshoe with Binion, and I think that's true. Obviously, Steve Wynn is a genius in his own right, but I think he learned very young many things from Benny Binion.
Amarillo Slim.
Amarillo Slim was one of the early poker players participating in the World Series of Poker, and he was very telegenic. He could go on the Tonight Show and play the professional Texan and tell those jokes and act like he was a guy just off the range, and he was instrumental in helping publicize the World Series of Poker because the TV just loved that guy.
Benny had to go to prison for a while on tax charges, but that wasn't something that happened here in Las Vegas, right? It was stuff he owed for back in Dallas?
That's correct. You mentioned Herbert Noble earlier in the show. Well, Herbert Noble told the cops where to find Benny's records, and they conducted a raid on his Dallas operations and found that Benny was making more than $1 million a year in the gambling house income, but was reporting only about a few thousand, and so that caused him some tax problems. He was in Las Vegas when they finally nailed him, but it was because of his Texas operations. That's correct.
And because of that, he couldn't have a gaming license the rest of his life, but it didn't exactly infringe on the family running the place, right?
No, it was a family operation. I think Benny was listed as director of public relations or something like that, which is silly. Although, he was great at public relations, but he clearly was running the place, and he said as much if anyone asked him that he was still in charge.
There was a story that he would go into the kitchen every day and taste the chili that was cooking, and he could taste it well enough to the point where if you had used tap water, he could taste the difference. You ever hear stories like that?
Oh, sure, and that was supposedly the recipe from the Dallas County Jail that he took with him when he went to Las Vegas.
Did he know Siegel, Bugsy Siegel?
Yeah, he loved Bugsy Siegel. In fact, he was there at the opening of the Flamingo, that big disastrous night when the Flamingo had not the crowds it anticipated and some bad weather. But he talked about later how much he admired Bugsy Siegel and thought he was just the nicest, most wonderful guy he ever met. He said that about a lot of mob guys. I call him the Will Rogers of mobsters because he never met one he didn't like, apparently. He was always full of praise for how nice they were and what great guys they were.
He was a central player, although he was on the sidelines of a scandal that involved a federal judge here, Harry Claiborne.
Right, very
those
close,
guys,
very close.
They had lunch every day together, I think was the story.
I think that's true, and he and Harry Claiborne were initially on the opposite sides of a murder case, but then Benny hired him, and they became the closest of friends. Now, when I talked to Joseph Jablonski, the FBI agent who ultimately went after Claiborne, that was one of the things that really puzzled Jablonski. He came into town, he's looking around, and he sees this federal judge at the table with Binion, who's a convicted felon, and they're laughing it up, as they did, as you say, every day. They were very close.
Yeah, Yablonsky had told us the same thing. Is that that's what sort of got him curious about Harry Claiborne and raised all kinds of suspicions. What's your take on Joe Yablonsky? I should tell the audience, for sake of those who don't know that part of it, is he came in sort of as a full of fire and brimstone kind of a guy who's going to clean up this one-horse town, and he saw Las Vegas the way a lot of federal agents saw Las Vegas in those days, as a nest of vipers and a corruption quagmire, and he was going to go after some of the people who were responsible, and this federal judge, Harry Claiborne, was one of them.
Yeah, he said he was going to plant the American flag in Las Vegas. I mean, I think he came in with, as you say, these grand designs. He got or helped get Claiborne put away. I've visited with him at his house. He's retired in Florida now, and the sense I have from him is that he doesn't feel he ever got his due, that he really didn't clean up Las Vegas the way he thought he should have, but that he should have been admired and respected for doing what he did, and instead there's sort of a feeling that he got run out of town. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him or disagree with him, but that's the feeling he still has, that he should have been honored. There should be statues put up of Joe Yablonsky as far as Joe Yablonsky thinks, but instead, you mention his name to people like Oscar Goodman now, and you get a spit and a sneer.
Did you get a sense of the relationship, Benny to Oscar?
I think it was good. I mean, Oscar still talks highly of him, and very admirably. I mentioned this FBI informant matter to Oscar, and Oscar said, "No, that's not true. I don't believe it. That can't be true." Just shaking his head, saying, "No, you're lying."
You mentioned you'd filed a FOIA request, Freedom of Information, about Ted Binion, the son. He was sort of the guy. He and Jack were running the Binion's Horseshoe for, after Benny went to prison. They sort of ran it. Ted had a reputation as a pretty tough guy, likable, affable, troubled, but could be pretty tough if somebody got out of line in that place. And I remember when I first came to town, that was the one place you didn't want to get out of line or do something stupid.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who ran afoul of Ted. One of the FBI documents I did get in Ted's file said that he saw a man in a casino once that he believed had been selling drugs to his sister, Barbara, who had a drug problem. And he said, "I'm going to grease that expletive." And 2 days later, the guy was found dead in the desert. So maybe something else happened, but certainly there appeared to be a causal relationship there. Other people who were suspected of cheating at the Horseshoe were taken out back and beaten very badly. There was one man who kicked in a plate glass window at the Horseshoe and was shot in the head on the sidewalk outside the Horseshoe. Some people thought Ted did that, but another man pleaded guilty to manslaughter in that case, the pit boss.
Do you have any documentation related to Ted Binion's death that's come through, or is that what the other thousands of pages might be?
Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for, and who knows when that'll turn up. I hope I live that long.
Is that another book?
I don't know. That's a good question. There have been lots of books written about Ted Binion, and there's been a movie and some TV shows, but who knows what's in those records? As you know, George, you open that big box and you go through 500 pages, and it's like panning for gold, and every now and then something turns up.
Welcome back to Coast. We're from one wild and woolly Texan to another. Stapleton Gray has written a new book called The Unbelievable True Tales of a Tall Texan, about a pretty remarkable life. Stapleton, welcome to the program.
Mr. Knapp, thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to speak with you. It's an honor, sir.
This is not your real name, right? This is a pseudonym.
That is correct.
Why?
For my family's sake and for mine as well, I reckon to say.
So is there danger? Is there some of this information that would cause some people to get upset stomachs, or you have to worry about you or other people, or what?
Well, I would say all of the above. My protection, my family's protection. I don't want anyone knowing who my father was. I don't want any affiliation with that part of his life. Unfortunately, that seems to be the only aspect that truly stands out. But he just took a wrong path in life, and that got him killed. And we prefer to stay anonymous. We have changed our names twice.
Would there be danger for you and your family if they figured out who you are and where you live?
Well, I don't really like to speculate. I would prefer to err on the side of caution and be prepared, as opposed to not say yes or no.
In the book that we're going to go over, and you're going to tell us about your father's really interesting life, but in the book there's a lot of clues. I guess if somebody wants to go to the trouble of figuring it out, a lot of details about different events that happened that should be traceable if you wanted to go to the trouble of looking them up in newspaper records from back then. You worry about that, or did you change some of the dates and places as well?
All of the names and all of the towns were changed. As far as what he did, no, so that is, it's all factual.
You were able to piece this together from how? I mean, who told you? You have an uncle who told you some of it. Did your mom ever open up about your father?
Absolutely. Mama never kept anything from us boys. She always told us what was going on, what was happening, because she wanted us to be aware. She wasn't going to lie to us. She wasn't going to hide anything from us. And she wanted us to know who our father truly was and what he turned into.
How did they meet? Tell that story.
At college. He actually wanted to be a medical missionary, and he was on football scholarship to a southern college here in Texas. And Mom was pretty much just shanghaied out of East Texas and dropped off in the front of the university. She was dating a Catholic boy, and we're Southern Baptists, and Papa did not want her to date a Catholic, and he packed her bags and took her a couple of 3 hours away and dropped her off, and she had to enroll. Well, Dad was already on the football team, and she made the swim team, and she walked on. She was a walk-on, I guess. I don't know if they called it that back then, but that's what she was. And she got a scholarship to pay for her tuition. Otherwise, she was going to be working. So she really enjoyed football and became friends with a lot of the players. And they inadvertently met from her watching at practices.
So your dad was a really big guy. How big?
He was 6'6" and 280. With a Stetson, he stood about 7 foot. He'd had to turn sideways to walk through a door.
And I guess boots. Man. Yeah, boots. He'd be even bigger. Assuming that somebody in Texas would be wearing boots, I guess. I'm messing with you. They were
pretty good assumption.
As you describe them in the book, though, your mom and dad are very different people.
Yes, sir. Very much so.
She's religious?
Yes, sir. She was a scripture-quoting, Bible-thumping Southern Baptist, and she was something else. I can honestly say that I am the only hell my mama ever raised. And it took its toll on her hair, but she was a devout Southern Baptist. Dad he went to church. He believed, but he wanted to help people in the beginning more than anything, hence the medical missionary desire. He actually turned down an appointment to West Point. His mom was friends with LBJ, and she got an appointment for my dad to West Point, and he turned it down and went to college here in Texas. Well, that really, really bent Grandma, and she didn't speak to him for a long time. And when he married Mama, I can't remember if Mama said she was at the wedding or not, but she always called Mama by the wrong name. Never would call her by her name.
Your father was a good enough football player that I'm not quite sure from the book whether he tried out or actually made the team, a pro team, but he was pretty good.
Yes, sir. He made the team, and it's not in the book. I've never told anyone what team he played for, but he was drafted by Detroit. So that is the first time that information's ever been divulged.
But he
and
got okay.
Go ahead.
He played for Detroit.
Yes,
you
sir.
want to say how long, or you'd rather not?
He was hurt in his first year. A broken knee sidelined him, and that effectively ended his football career.
And changed
spiral.
everything. That led to his other career.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That's where the downward spiral began.
So tell me that story. How he was approached, who approached him, and what was said, as you've been able to reconstruct it.
Yes, sir. Of course, I never knew any names. All I knew were scouts, for lack of a better term. They had seen my dad in practice, and they were quite impressed with the way that he handled himself. So after he was hurt, in order to keep the pain meds coming, they made him an offer that I'm sure sounded pretty damn good to him. They kept him supplied with pain pills even after he didn't need them. He became addicted to them. And from there, they presented him options to collect debts and other various jobs that may have needed doing at the time, but his big thing was knee breaker. Yes, sir. He kind of lost himself in all the Darvon he was taking, and once he realized what had happened, it was too late. He was in too deep, and he couldn't get out.
Did you ever get anything from him about incidents and things that he did, knees that he broke, people he beat up or intimidated?
I
or
do
you
know
pieced
of a
it
couple.
together enough? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I do know of a couple of men that disappeared, and they were never they were from East Texas, and they were actually not very good guys, and he made them disappear.
It escalated, though. It went from breaking knees to, as you're suggesting, something much more serious. So who are these guys that he's working for? We're using the general term mob. I think you mentioned
The
to
Dixie
me
Mafia.
Dixie Mafia.
Dixie Mafia. That's not in the book either, so I'll just go ahead and throw that out there too. But that's exactly who it was, and they're prevalent in East Texas and Louisiana.
Yeah, I think they're in Biloxi, Mississippi as well. And are they affiliated with what we'd call the Mafia? I seem to remember there was some about Dixie Mafia being affiliated with the Chicago outfit.
Yes, with the old Dixie Mafia. The newer Dixie Mafia is a newer generation that doesn't adhere to the code of conduct, if you will, that the older generation did. And the Dixie Mafia was, yes, were affiliated with the Chicago outfit. They were a bunch of good old boys that went big time, for lack of a better term.
Is it gambling, drugs? What were they into? What were they doing?
What my dad would collect would be gambling debts. I don't know. That's what I do know about his collections. What he was tasked to attend as far as the drugs, prostitution, I have no idea. I can only assume that at one point in time, sure, he may have had a hand in some of that. Who knows? I mean, he was quite busy.
So he starts working for these guys. It takes him away from home a lot. He's traveling a lot. It's pretty tough on the marriage.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. He would tell Mom that he was going out of town on business. He had told her that he had taken a job in insurance, and he would go out of town on business trips. And he would tell Mama that it was work-related, which in fact it was, but he would lead her to believe that it was insurance-related. So he would travel, and he would be gone for extended periods of time. So Mom was she was left alone. She didn't know exactly what was going on by any means. She knew that he wasn't playing football anymore, of course, and she thought that he still had some ties, friends with the team, and maybe he was going to visit them as well. And some of his business trips that he did go to Chicago, he alluded that he was going to visit some of the football players, but in fact he wasn't. It was all mafia related. And Mama got pregnant with me, and he quit traveling for a while until after I was born. So he did try to make a concerted effort, I reckon, but he was always, once he made that commitment to the mob, then there was no refusal on his part. He had to answer the call of duty.
There's a story you tell toward the beginning of the book. In 1971, your mom was working at for a Christian organization at a clinic helping drug addicts, and
Yes,
something bad was about to happen, and your dad caught wind of it somehow.
Yes, sir.
Tell the story.
Mama was working with a well-respected doctor down in South Texas at a clinic helping heroin addicts. She had befriended the gang leader, the main gang leader, and was witnessing to him about the Lord. She was helping his gang get off the smack, and was actually making a difference in the community, but at the same time was also putting a dent in the drug trade. She was dipping into their pockets. So the suppliers of the heroin, they put a bomb in her office. My dad actually, the city that everything was being handled in which it was being handled, he was in the know of everything, my dad. So he knew what was going on and where. He told Mom that it was time for her to leave. He packed her one suitcase and packed me a little bag and put us in his Lincoln, with Mama asking why all the time. He wouldn't tell her. So further into East Texas we drove, and he dropped us off at her parents' house, Mama and Papa, and told her to get out. And when she did, she drug me out of the car too. He took the bags out of the trunk, put them on the sidewalk, and got back in the car and drove off, with us just standing there watching him drive away.
And then something really did happen, right, at the clinic?
Yes, sir. It was a few days later that a bomb exploded in Mama's office, and it killed a few people and wounded a lot. But it was at that point that Mom realized that my dad had just saved her life. She always figured that it'd be God. She just didn't know that he would take the form of Dad. So he actually saved my mom's life by taking us out of town. Yes, sir.
Your father becomes sort of a mythic figure in your life. I mean, he's gone a lot, and then I guess he goes to prison. I'm not quite sure what the years were, but there's something involving art. He had some stolen art, and he was sent away.
Yes, sir. He was pulled over for speeding, of all things, and he had a trunk full of stolen art. There was some Arte, Van Gogh, some Picasso. Not a big collection, but enough to get him busted for interstate transportation of stolen art. So he did go to the federal pen. Being federal, you don't get parole, so he did his time, and he got out. And after he got out is when he was approached by his younger brother to run guns down to Central and South America under the guise of just gun running, but it was funded by the CIA.
Yeah, your uncle eventually told you that, right?
Yes, sir. Uncle John did tell me that it had to have been 1981, maybe a little before. But he was a SEAL out of Nam, and he would, after he got out, he was still doing missions for. He was approached by the CIA. So Uncle John actually was an operator for them. I can't say what he did or whatever, but I do know that he approached Dad with this opportunity to run guns to the Sandinistas and also into Argentina to the ousted regime. So in all actuality, they were running guns for the CIA through Mexico down to Nicaragua and into Argentina, supplying both sides of the civil war that was happening there. So that was going on right in the late 70s, yes, sir.
Well, your dad ends up with some interesting contacts, working for the Dixie Mafia, doing some jobs for some very bad people, and then doing jobs for the CIA, who you can also say is bad people. And then eventually he gets on the FBI's most wanted list. And although you're not using his real name on your website, you do have the wanted poster, so to speak, and you also post some photos of your uncle there in uniform. So there is some, my guest is Stapleton Gray, telling us about his father, who turns out was a hitman for the Dixie Mafia. Stapleton, growing up, your dad's sort of on the run a lot or gone a lot. Your mom remarries, and the guy she marries is no prize, right?
No, sir, he wasn't. He was an alcoholic. He was very abusive, and I guess the only thing I can say good about him is he put me on my first horse, Tomboy, and that's one of my favorite memories that I have as a youngster. But other than that, he was a no good son of a bitch. I tell you that.
I would think he'd have to be worried that your dad would show up. If he's abusing you and your brother, that he'd have to worry that the dad would show up one day and there'd be hell to pay.
Oh, my stepdad talked big. And please forgive me if I hesitate. I'm reliving these memories as I'm speaking. So I haven't thought about these in quite a while. But my stepdad was a big talker, and he thought he was mean. And there were a couple of times that my dad did show up at the house, and we were always alerted to when he would be coming, because he would call Mama and let us know that he was on his way, and he would use my name to speak with her. Our phones were tapped, and he wasn't just going to come right out and say his name, so he just chose my name to say who it was on the line. And when my stepdad would hear that, he would be out of town quick.
Conveniently. So you say that your phones were tapped, and in the book you say that the house was under constant surveillance. How do you know? I mean, do you see these guys hanging outside?
Oh, absolutely. They had their sedan parked in front of the house. My brother and I had bodyguards, FBI bodyguards, that would follow us. They would post themselves on campus. They were actually 100% hands-off, eyes only, so to speak, and that's just your tax dollars at rest instead of working. But that's what it was. It was like that when they would follow our bus, when we would go to school, and when I would be at football practice, or when I'd be rodeoing or what have you. They would be there. And they weren't very subtle. They would be off in a corner, but it was always you always knew who they were just by the way they looked. And it got almost comical after a while, and then later they were just ignored, kind of like a train horn in the distance. You hear it when you first move near. Afterward, after you've been there for some time, you don't hear the train. We pretty much didn't see them because we ignored them.
You make the point in the book that your dad would show up now and then, and it seemed like he'd always show up at times when these guys weren't around watching, as if he knew.
Yes, sir. He had his own counter surveillance going. He had employed some mercenaries for I don't know how long, but they were always present throughout my teens till I graduated high school. But he seemed to have the communications going from both directions. He knew when they would be there. He knew when the shift changes were, and he would make an appearance when there were times when it was almost orchestrated, it seemed, that the feds would be gone for a certain amount of time, and my dad was there. And I never understood if they were really looking for him, why'd they leave? So I really don't understand how that worked unless he was just a very manipulative genius in the art of...
Or it was a charade.
That I've thought of that as well. I really have.
So occasionally he would show up. Once, you write about it in the book, once he showed up covered in blood. Other times your mom would slip away to go meet him. Was he providing support for the family? Seems to me you make the point that she wanted nothing to do with it. He had to be making good money doing this kind of work.
Oh, absolutely. She, well, if you want to call that good money, but he did make a lot. And he offered Mama over $1 million. Throughout my childhood, and she turned every penny of it down. She called it blood money. She didn't want any part of it. She didn't want to be associated with the pain and suffering of others for our comforts.
So tell us about the crime, and it's a horrible crime, the one that put him on the most wanted list.
Yes, sir. It was New Year's Eve, 1982. And he went to collect a personal gambling debt from this guy down south. And the family was supposed to have been gone, but they had canceled their travel plans at the last minute and stayed home through the Christmas break and New Year's break. And when my dad arrived at the estate, the first child victim answered the door and invited my dad in. So my dad went into the room where the debtor, for lack of a better word, was, and he ordered him to call the rest of his family in. He asked who else was there, and he told them. So he told the dad to call. My dad ordered the debtor to call his family into the main room. And from there, he proceeded to interrogate him about the money he owed him. It was a personal gambling debt that my dad went to collect. It was $100,000, and he did tell Mama that. So the guy begged for more time. I say begged. He what do you do when you've got a gun stuck in your face fixing to kill you and your family? He was begging. I can only assume. So my dad ordered him to ordered the man to take his family into the master bath. When he did, one of the kids jumped on my dad to try to take the gun away, and my dad knocked him out, put him in the shower. The mother was screaming. He knocked her out. So there was 2 unconscious bodies in the shower. The second kid turned to run, and he shot them in the back. He turned back to the father, shot him in his left ear, then he shot the mother and the other kid in the head.
So 4 total? He killed 4 people?
He killed 3. He turned around to pick up the other child that had fled, and she, well, made it out of the house, and he didn't know the grounds. It was nighttime, and she crawled through the woods and was picked up on the highway by a passerby and taken to the hospital, where she identified my dad, not by name, but by physical.
She was able to give him enough information that they figured out who he was?
Yes, sir.
Was he already wanted at that point? Were they wanted him from other stuff?
No, sir. They couldn't tie anything to him. They had tried to tie some murders from California to Georgia on him, but they just didn't have the evidence. Wherever he would go, there would be bodies left when he would leave, but they couldn't prove that he was the actual trigger man. So well, he was under surveillance.
To learn that your father killed an entire family, I mean, that's pretty tough. That's tough stuff to deal with, huh?
Yes, sir. It's quite horrific. I mean, and that's just from my aspect, the survivor. There's no way I could ever put myself in their shoes. It's just unthinkable.
When did you get the information? How did you find out that he was wanted for that crime? How soon afterward, or was it years later that you learned that he was wanted for that?
On New Year's '83, Mama took my brother and me to see the new Clint Eastwood movie in town. Afterward, we stopped off at Sonic to get a burger, and at that point, a whole herd of law enforcement surrounded us. FBI, the Rangers, Texas Rangers, local sheriff, police, and they approached Mom while she was parked in one of the bays there, and asked her to step out of the truck, and took her to the back and sat her in a car and told her what had happened. They didn't tell her exactly then what had happened, but they said that there was something very important that needed to be discussed with her about my father, and she needed to come with them right then. So she got back in the truck, and my brother and I were questioning her as to what was going on, and she just white-knuckled the steering wheel and yelled at us to shut up, and we did. We were escorted back to our farm and through a parade of flashing lights. It was for all the neighbors, well, hell, the small town where we lived, everybody knew something was up. And when we got back to the farm, the Rangers and the FBI took Mom into the kitchen and told her that my dad was being sought in relation to triple homicide and the 4th, attempted murder. So at that point, it seemed that the whole sky came crashing down on Mama's head. She physically got ill. She threw up. Could not believe that what they were telling her. So after what seemed forever, I have no idea, but my brother and I had been sent to our rooms, and she came back there and told us what had happened. And from there, she called Mama and Papa, her folks, told them that she was bringing us out there to see them, but she had to come back. She told Mama and Papa what happened. Papa just loved my dad before all the bad stuff, of course, but he never stopped loving him, even through his faults. And I say faults when you kill a family, that's pretty much unforgivable. But he made that decision, and I was going to say he had to live with it, but he died with that decision.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Tell me this: there had to have been news coverage, newspaper stories, or something, and maybe you've acquired them in your research to put together the book. Did the story come out about why your father had done this? I mean, was it clear did the law enforcement figure it out? It was a gambling debt he was collecting on someone's behalf?
No, sir. He told Mom it was his personal gambling debt that he went to collect. He said the family wasn't supposed to be there, but since they were, he wasn't going to leave any witnesses, and he did. But the deal with him going to collect his own debt and making the decision to kill them was, at that point in time, his end game. That's when he decided that everything he had just crossed into oblivion, and he had to get out. That's once he pulled the trigger. He cried and cried on Mama's lap days before the final day, and he begged Mama for forgiveness. He said that if he had to do it over again, he wouldn't kill those people. But he thought that at that point in time, it was the only choice he had, the only decision he could make, because he was in that mindset.
So he's on the FBI's most wanted list. You've got a copy of the wanted poster on your website. How long was he on the run? How'd they catch him? And describe the circumstances at the end there.
He was on the run for 9 months. In fact, it was 31 years, September 15th, that he was killed. But he was on the run for 9 months in East Texas. He was staying in a cabin on a lake in deep East Texas. And he was using his grandmother's maiden name, And a game warden came up to his cabin to tell him that there was a wanted fugitive that the police were looking for, and they had a description of the man, but they didn't have his name. The game warden recognized my dad just from the description, because there's not very many people that are that big just hanging out at the lake in off season. So he came out of hiding and went to the hospital where my brother was born. He had broken his hand on purpose, so he went to this hospital where my brother was born, that my grandfather had built, that Papa had built. He was the administrator. He went into the ER yelling for my grandfather, yelling his name, and also demanding his hand be treated.
So doing a lot of stuff to draw attention to himself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So they told him his hand was broken too badly, that they were a small hospital and didn't have the facilities to accommodate him, that he'd have to drive. He demanded some pain meds, and they said that it would, impair his judgment to drive a vehicle. He punched a doctor, broke his jaw. He knocked out a nurse. Someone called the police, and it seemed like that was such a small town. The police were right down the road. They were at the hospital in seconds. They were on my dad like bark on a tree, and they handcuffed him, but they handcuffed him behind his back initially. The doctor told the doctor that he punched, said that his hand was broken so badly, if they could handcuff him in front, it would be more humane. That's my word. I don't know exactly what the words for the doctor used. So the police allowed that. They handcuffed my father in the front. On the way there to the police station, he kept asking if they would please uncuff him because his hand hurt too bad. They told him as soon as they got in the police station, and put him in the back, that they'd uncuff him. They didn't search him. When they pulled into the police station, to the drive, they walked right in the front door into the lobby. The counter, they were facing a counter that was an L shape. So the two officers told my dad to stand at the end of the counter, and they proceeded to walk around. My dad reached down the front of his breeches, in front of his jeans, with his good hand, and retrieved his 9mm and shot in between the two cops.
Trying not to hit him.
Absolutely. He was just feet away, and there's no way he would have missed it. This was his end game, and a rookie in the back came out and shot him.
Sounds like suicide by cop.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. He always told Mama that she would know when he was dead, and he chose the town that my brother was born to announce that.
Stapleton, we're about out of time here. I just want to mention that you went on to a military career. You became pretty tough hombre yourself. Tried to get this stuff behind you, and later, twice in your life, the same guys your dad worked for tried to recruit you to work for them, right?
Yes, sir, that is correct. The first time I was on a rodeo scholarship, and they approached me one day when I came out of class. When they did that, I really turned them down flat, walked right to my dorm room, packed my gear, got in my truck, and left.
Bill Friedman is an author and researcher of mafia casino crimes. He is here to discuss the true story of America's most infamous public enemy #1 gangsters, based on exhaustive documentation and research that he chronicles the true history of illegal gambling, rum running, organized crime, and politics of law enforcement during the Prohibition era, but he ties it together to much more current events as well in this new book, All Against the Law. Bill, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
You're not a guy who seems like he has a lot of time on his hands. You're a busy guy still with casino consulting, things of that sort. Why did you decide to write this book?
The book started because from an early age I found casino card dealing to be fascinating, and I always wanted to become a card dealer in Las Vegas. So the day I turned 21, I moved there. And back in that era, Nevada had no homegrown casino industry. Every time a new establishment opened or one expanded, they had to bring in dealers and executives from illegal casinos around the country. And I came from a nonviolent middle-class family, never been exposed to this, and all the executives I worked for had worked in these casinos, and of course they had to pay the police to leave them alone, but they got no protection from the police. They were an illegal business, so if someone tried to rob them or someone tried to take over their operation, they had to defend themselves, and these were the kind of people that were working behind me. And so every night I would try, when I got off work, to go out with one of these guys, and we'd have a late-night toddy, and I would sit and listen to their stories. And they were the most fascinating people I ever met, and I just wanted to learn about how gambling had developed across America and in Nevada. And, of course, Nevada gaming control was new. It didn't even start till 1949. And it was a new form of law enforcement, so I wanted to research it. And I started on my days off to go to the library and read old newspapers, and realized I didn't have the time to do it, but it had been my dream. And along came the Vietnam War, and I was one of the first people drafted.
Yeah.
And I declared as a conscientious objector, and the FBI did a investigation of me, as they're required to do, to confirm that I indeed qualified under the standards. And when I did and came up to be drafted, because they don't want people to take advantage of this, and you're still drafted for 2 years, but instead of military service, you go into an alternative service. and it's typically in a hospital near where you live to clean bedpans for 2 years. But because of the investigation, and you have to remember when this happened, this was years before the FBI inserted an undercover agent into organized crime. They said, you have the most unusual background we've ever seen. You've never committed a crime, and yet you do nothing but hang out with hoodlums. And you have a background and a knowledge of these people from the outside that no one else has. We're going to give you the choice. Do you want to clean bedpans, or would you like to live in Las Vegas and hang out with hoodlums for 2 years? And I decided I'd rather hang out with hoodlums. So they drafted me, gave me 2 years that I was to work for the University of California School of Criminology. There was a great criminologist that headed it. He designed the program. Unfortunately, he passed away during it, but I carried it on. And when I started, I thought in the 2 years I would put together the whole history of organized crime. Well, it turned out to be one very complicated, very huge amount of material, because all of organized crime is territorial. So I had to study every city individually and what went on. And secondly, all these guys in Nevada came from Prohibition. And then after Prohibition's when they opened casinos across the country as we have them today, wide open, but very high-end, and many of them were far more elegant than anything you'll find on the Strip today. And they operated these until they finally moved on to Nevada and built the Strip. And so I began the program, but what came as a surprise to me, because of this Prohibition background, I thought if I found just a few of them, they'd fill me in on everything. I assumed very incorrectly that they talked to each other and they knew what was going on. And it turned out that these were the most tight-lipped people that I'd ever encountered, still to this day, because in Prohibition, you couldn't talk to anybody about what you did. They were moving huge amounts of liquid. And when the shipments would come in, they didn't want anyone to be aware they were on the move, to go out and get the meet the freighters and high-speed them in on speedboats and then convoy them across the country. So, and then once they got them to their destination, they had to put them in warehouses that no one knew about. So it turned out that none of them talked to each other. And when I interviewed I interviewed almost 600 people before the project was done.
Wow.
Not the 2 years, but over many years. But what really surprised me, I would interview two partners separately, and when I'd get to the second partner in a gang, I'd tell them about other legal or illegal businesses his partner had, and a few times they not only did they always were they shocked, but sometimes they were angry because they said they absolutely weren't. And I not only had the interview, but I had documentation, so it was just step by step going back through enormous newspaper records, FBI records, and then interviewing these people to put it all together.
Well, it's a massive piece of work. It's wonderful. And before we jump into the specific contents, though, about you, I mean, you ran those two properties on the Strip. There's nothing else like them on the Strip anymore, which locals, longtime locals, lament all the time. How is it that the mobs didn't make a run at you, or did they? I mean, there was never a scandal at those two places. It was among all the properties on the Strip, there was all a scandal about all of them almost, about mob infiltration or skimming or something like that.
Well, we were in an interesting period. There was the four major, and by the way, that took me 20 years before I put together what I'm just going to tell you. The four biggest gangs in Prohibition, of course, they were very profitable. They because of Prohibition, local professional street gangs turned into major organized crime gangs. That's where this all began. And they never interrelated with each other. But now all of a sudden they need various products. They could help each other in various ways. And they started partnering. Some of these groups started partnering with each other. Well, the four biggest groups, politically in the underworld, partnered with factions. And they also partnered in prohibition businesses, legal businesses, the casinos. And so these four gangs ended up building 80% of Las Vegas in what I call its golden era, from the Flamingo in 1946 to Caesar's Palace in 66. And so it was very, very heavily mob infested. In the era we're talking about, when I became a manager, and that was in the 70s, all these guys that had built it had sold out. And some of them had sold out to more current organized crime people, because a man in Kansas City, the head of the mafia by the name of Nick Savella, had the most influence over the Teamsters Union Pension Fund. And he saw that funds were given to various people across the country that he had close ties to buy some of these places out. So we had this new group of mobsters, which of course part of them were shown in the movie Casino. And then we had the two big entrepreneurs. We had Howard Hughes, who I worked for, and Kirk Kerkorian. And at the same time, Hilton started bringing in the corporations. So in this era, you have all of these very different groups, and the corporations stayed away from this. The entrepreneurs stayed away. I knew all these people. One of the big ironies was it became an absolute no-no for licensing to have any association with organized crime. They were totally afraid of any contact because they didn't know how deep it ran. But because I'd been doing this research all of my life, when I was licensed, I was afraid that they would say, you know, you've got to cut off all contacts, and I wasn't even sure they'd say you shouldn't have done this, even though I was doing it for academic purposes. And when I was licensed at the Castaways, which was the first of the two, the three gaming control board members pulled me aside because they knew me very well with my research, and they said, now, understand, you've got to keep yourself clean, but we want this story out. Nobody knows what really happened here, and you're the only one, and we want you to continue this work. So I was the only person allowed to associate with hoods even after I was licensed.
That's pretty amazing. It's even more amazing. This book, which comes up to close to current times, starts in the Depression era with all these public enemies #1, names that we know from movies, you know, John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, Alvin Karpis. I had no idea that there were ties between those guys to Nevada in any way, but you found it.
Well, I mean, I have to create the era for you. I think it's one of the most interesting and colorful, but we're going back to a different time. This was just after the mass production of cars allowed the average person to buy it. And this changed crime and law enforcement throughout the whole country. Up until then, when the police got a phone call that a crime been committed, depending on the speed of the guy's horse, they knew that he was within a few blocks of the crime scene. All of a sudden, very quickly, he could be out of town, and depending on where the town was located, even across a state line. And the police had never interacted before. They never had to. So they had to get used to high-speed chases, to going after people in other jurisdictions. And part of what developed at that time, 4 cities became safe havens for fugitives on the run. 2 of them were St. Paul, Minnesota, and Hot Springs, Arkansas. Kansas City, which is very important to the history of the Las Vegas Strip, to go back, St. Paul and Hot Springs, it was top detectives who covered the criminals, told them how to behave, and kept them under their thumb and took big payoffs. Then in Kansas City, the mafia chieftain had enough influence with the police that he's the one that decided who was allowed in and who wasn't. Reno was totally unique, and that's near our territory, yours and mine, George. In Reno, there was, remember, it was a very small state. There was 9,000 people in Reno, which was the biggest city, but it was on the first transcontinental highway that had just opened. It was isolated, and the two owners, Bill Graham and Jim McKay, they had the largest casino and the state's largest hotel a half mile from the railroad. And back then, people didn't take vacations away from the area they lived in. These famous resorts you read about in history were always normally no more than 7 to 15 miles out of town. They were indeed great resorts, but you went by horse and buggy until this era. And the only business that, tourist business that Graham and McKay had was the traveling businessmen who'd stay at their hotel. And then they had another casino there that only ran weekends that required fine dress, and of course the women were beautifully gowned in the evenings. Well, to get business, Graham and McKay started, as far as I can determine, the first major tourism program for people to come in distances. And what they did, because they wanted more business, they had some locals, and they had some of these businessmen, they developed a crime emporium for organized crime, for people involved in financial crime, and they offered a whole bunch of services. And when I finally found this and started finding the records on it, and then I was fortunate enough, because this was in the late 1960s, and we're talking about the 1930s, I found a few of the executives still working in the industry or available that had worked for Graham and McKay.
Wow.
And they described what went on. And when I put together all the services they offered criminals, I never could have dreamt up this stuff. And one of them was they hid fugitives. And they owned the police department, and they would allow any fugitive to come to town. And the reason why this was so important in my book is the four major crime gangs, these were official public enemy number ones by the Justice Department, the only ones in history. And you've got Dillinger, you've got Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, and then you've got Elvin Karpis and the Barker brothers. All of them, at some point in their career, hid out there. It was isolated. No one knew about them. And Graham and McKay made it very clear to them. Everybody in town was aware of it. I mean, you knew these small town, these hoods were there. They made it clear to these guys, you're welcome to be here, but the women and the children have to feel safe. If you get out of line, we're sending you home to your jurisdiction. And none of them got out of line in Reno, so nobody cared. Well, they would come in with their bank robbing loot. They'd come in with their, there was a number of major kidnappings for ransom in that period, and they'd give it to Graham and McKay, and they'd very slowly disperse it to winners in their cashier's cages. They'd take and put the money in safety deposit boxes to protect it for them in their cages. And it just went on and on, the services that they offered. So these people came into Reno, and it was a haven. In fact, there was one point where Babyface Nelson, he kept going between his home of Chicago to Reno and to the Bay Area where he had connections, and that was really where he moved. Well, when he was in Reno one time, he left his car in the garage and took off with a friend in their car to go to San Francisco. The FBI heard about it. They got a tip, and they found his car in the garage, and they told the owner who they were. They had to deal with the owner. They took and put 3 men in workman's clothes and had them working on another car.
Hold on, Bill.
Well, Babyface Nelson had left town. He left his car in the garage, and one important thing to understand: the FBI was created as a national police force by Congress to go after these bank robbers, and so they were very new at their job, and they assumed that the garage owner was on their side when, of course, Babyface had paid him to protect his car. So they didn't have his house staked out. And when Babyface arrived back in town, the first thing he did was go to the house, and he saw the porch light on. And the porch light said, "The FBI is here."
Oh.
So you have 3 men, FBI agents, inside the garage. You have 6 FBI agents surrounding the garage. But Babyface had left in that car a number of machine guns, bulletproof vests, and all the other weaponry, and he wanted it, and he was a hothead. And unlike any of the other authors before, I went through the trials of the people who harbored these 4 gangs. Everybody involved went to jail unless they turned state's witness, and they told how the robberies and other crimes were planned, and they also told how their fugitive runs went. So this is the first complete story. And 2 evenings, the whole gang, Babyface's gang, ended up on a deserted dirt road in yelling, screaming arguments because Babyface wanted to go in and wipe the FBI out, and none of the other guys saw any rationale to that, and fortunately both times they stopped him from starting this fight. And so they just took off and left the FBI sitting there with the car and continued their fugitive run. One thing that I didn't think to tell you was the amount of money that went through the casino. This was a major marketing promotion. Graham and McKay, anytime they dealt with anyone, they gave them $1,000 bills if they took and laundered their money. And for those who have seen the movie The Sting, which came out about 40 years ago, and with Paul Newman, and they had a false bookmaking operation, well, Graham and McKay went them a step further. They had a real state licensed bank off the beaten track with no customers, and it was set up so every con man in America could bring in his victim. An official bank cashed the check and got that check back. Forget modern electronics, that everything's done with wire transfers. There was none of that. And they'd get that check back and cashed in the person's bank before they could get home and stop payment. And they had this bank operating for no other purpose. And in today's dollars, the amount of money that went through there is absolutely phenomenal. And the executives told me it was a very surreal world they lived in. A quarter of America was unemployed. They'd go to work each day or each evening, and they'd pass panhandlers on the street, men who couldn't find jobs, that had their hands out for money. They'd walk into this casino, and each of them told me they rarely had a shift where there weren't $1,000 bills being played on the tables.
These guys were, I mean, do other historians has this been reported before? I mean, Graham and McKay are pillars of the community. They're respectable guys. You say that everybody in town kind of knew what they were up to, but has this Is this the general view of what they were up to?
Oh yeah, there's loads of evidence. All the interviews did was support it and embellish it and show how it actually worked. Graham and McKay went to prison for 9 years, and that's why I talked about the amount of money, because in the trial, it was unbelievable the size of the amounts the victims had lost and how many there were. And of course, all of them weren't involved in testifying. They picked the cases. So there is tremendous records. And of course, going through those trials, they had a cashier from the bank testify to how it operated. So there is records of all of this. But so much of the color is brought in when you get to interview people, but the facts, just like you've spent your whole life, George, you come up with these incredible facts. Those were out there. It was just no one had gone after them before.
Let's talk about some of these public enemies. Number one, I mean, there had never been a designation like that before. It was never necessary, I guess, before until the automobile, and then I guess the Tommy gun changed things as well. People like John Dillinger, you write in this book, became folk heroes. Why so?
This was a Midwestern phenomenon, and I never truly understood that one. So that part I can't answer. But most of their crimes occurred in a 7-state area. And these people not only were suffering from the national depression, but there was also drought problems, and people were being wiped out. And they became folk heroes because the banks started foreclosing on these homeowners and these farmers. And people were helpless. They were frustrated. They played by the rules. Everything was going wrong. And there was someone that had the power to do something about it. And Dillinger himself was very clever. Not making him a good guy, I'm just saying clever. When he'd go into a bank, there were people, they'd see the machine guns coming in and they'd pull the money out, and he'd say, "We don't want your money, we want the bank's money." And then he would take and grab records on their loans and take them with him and destroy them. And so they saw him as Robin Hood, taking from the rich land grabbers and helping everybody else. Of course, he didn't help anybody else, but that was the kind of image they developed. And there was a good part of the population that objected, but there was a part that truly made them folk heroes. When Pretty Boy Floyd was buried, it was probably the biggest funeral in the history of the state of Oklahoma.
You wrote that Dillinger, for example, had kind of a sense of humor, and he had sent a letter to Henry Ford, I guess, praising his automobiles. "Thanks for helping me escape." He also, I guess, tell me about that. And he also wrote letters to J. Edgar Hoover taunting him.
He was just a bad boy his whole life, and wanted to find an easy way out, but he got caught. He was on a fugitive run, and interestingly, Dillinger and Babyface Nelson met at the casino in Reno. It could have been they just played craps together. It could have been Graham and McKay introduced them, but Dillinger got 9 men out of a prison break. When he was released from prison, he came back and smuggled guns in and released 9 men. 2 of them joined Babyface Nelson's gang, and my personal instinct, and I put it's instinct, is they made the contact. So the 2 of them met there, and then Dillinger went on to, I'm trying to think, I'm sorry, Tucson, Arizona. That was what I was having trouble remembering. And he went to Tucson, and by sheer accident, the police knew there was some bad guys in town and arrested them, having no idea who they were. They took him in easily. And he got very upset that some small-town cops could get him. And after that, he seemed to have a real chip on his shoulder. That kind of just damaged his ego. So he took off after the authorities from there on out. And as you said, there was these two incredible letters. One, he claimed he always used a Ford, and of course he used whatever he could get, but he used them, and I forget the lines now, but he said, if it hadn't been for the speed of your cars, I would have been caught. And they came out with that in their ads, but they hid the real letter because they didn't want to offend the police, because that was one of their big customers, the police departments of America. So they reworded it just that he was praising the car. And then he went after Hoover, because Hoover had very bombastic statements about how tough he was and how he was going to get them. And he came out that he was America's public enemy number one, was going to take out America's top cop number one. And Hoover went and got an armored plated car.
The book is pretty tough on Hoover. I mean, it's not like you're picking sides or anything. You documented each step of the way why you're pretty tough on him, but you see him as sort of a blowhard who took a lot of credit that he was undeserved, and who later did some really bad things. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it shows that I have a very personal dislike, but that clearly is there. But it's because of the facts. There was one crime, the Kansas City Massacre, and it came 4 years after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Today, everybody knows about Valentine's Day, but Kansas City at the time enraged the public. That was the one that fired everybody up. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 7 gangsters were killed. In Kansas City, 4 lawmen were shot to death, 2 wounded. 3 of them were FBI agents who were then an accounting agency who had a few criminal responsibilities, were not allowed to carry guns, were not allowed to make arrests. And when this happened, the public was incensed, and Congress turned the FBI, which accounted for government funds and was made up of accountants and some attorneys, and turned them into a national police force. The problem was not with what they intended, but Hoover had been a librarian, had never been interested in law enforcement, never done any police work, never learned about it, never had an interest, and he never trained his men. That's why these raids were so disastrous so often. But he had an attitude that led to all the other problems. He believed his job was not to catch criminals, but to make people feel safe in their beds at night. He thought it was an imagery issue, that he was supposed to produce records that were often false about how successful he was, to give these statements about how safe people were, and he didn't go after most major criminals. Organized crime, he had his people, except in special cases when his boss, the Attorney General, would order him, or he had an interest for some reason. They weren't allowed to touch organized crime as it flourished across America. They didn't go after many major criminals, and this is all from their records. Before I came along, there were many, many fine historians that took the FBI's records and showed everything I'm talking about. It's just I went much further, because going through local newspapers, the local authorities, the mayors, the prosecutors, the police, all the eyewitnesses add so much to the information out there of what the public saw and experienced in addition to all these records. And he turned it into this agency into 2 things. One was he turned it into an enormous publicity agency. They had people working for the FBI who either wrote or edited his books, by Hoover. They did movie scripts. They did radio TV show series, and they even did comic books. And he was putting out all this enormous publicity about how great he was. The institution no longer was about the law enforcement, but what the director was doing. And the other thing he did, and this was a serious problem for America, was instead of having an enormous part of his force go after criminals, he was interested in protecting himself politically and in manipulating the political system of America. So their primary job of the FBI was to get dirt on politicians, the rich, the famous, the celebrities. And when Hoover died, he had several assistant directors, and his secretary, and this all came out in testimony by these people. They spent 2 months with going through filing cabinets in special offices that no one else was allowed into of all this filth, and they shredded it. And after he died, Hoover, one of his assistants for many years, did a newspaper interview, and he said, our job was to get the filth on America, and he said whenever we got it, he said there was one guy assigned from the headquarters, and he'd go visit the senator or the representative and say, we learned this about your daughter. We know you don't want it public, and we're going to keep it secret, and we just want to know you have a friend. And he said in the interview, my God, what do you think that meant to these people? And he had them in his pocket after that when it came to any kind of vote that he was interested in. And this is the way he ran it. And if you look at the major gangsters, virtually none of them have a file that opened during Prohibition. And I'll use Ben Siegel as an example because he's so important to the history of Nevada. He was as big a violator of Prohibition as there was. He was in Manhattan. And the FBI, the whole time of 14 years of Prohibition, have no file on him. For the years he lived in New York after that, they have no file on him, but he went to Hollywood. And in Hollywood, he started escorting around a woman who was the #1 socialite in town. She was not in the movie industry. Her name wasn't known to the public, but she threw more dinner parties than anyone else, and he escorted her to the premieres and to the parties and all of this sort of thing. As soon as he came above the radar to Hoover, it wasn't the crimes he was after. He wanted to know her political connections through him, and then launched an investigation and put him under intense scrutiny.
We know that, and you mentioned in the book, too, after Hoover died, and the shredding was taking place, but there were a lot of people who wanted to know what was in those files or wanted to see what their own file, Nixon, the Kennedys, I would imagine. I mean, who knows what, you kind of get squeamish thinking about the kind of dirt that was there, but from an historical perspective, it would have been pretty cool to read some of that stuff. We're talking with Bill Friedman about his new book, All Against the Law, and the dirt spread all the way to the White House. When we come back, we'll get into a discussion about how Harry Truman fits into all this. Stay with us on Coast to Coast AM. Bill Friedman, you have a chapter in the book. It's called Hoover's War on Democracy, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. I mean, the kind of files that you were telling us about before the break that Hoover maintained on politicians of all stripes, it was a threat to democracy. You think about people like the Kennedys who found themselves at odds with Hoover. They had to have been told, hey, we've got files on you, the kind of indiscretions that we now know about the brothers. What did they do in a spot like that? How do you get rid of the guy? I guess the answer is you don't.
Well, I understand your question, but I can't give you a generalization because I just don't have enough information. But Bobby Kennedy was made Attorney General, and clearly he and Hoover had a war. In fact, a friend of the Kennedy family wrote a book about it. And Bobby Kennedy, for the first time, made Hoover do his job. He went after major gangsters. He went after Jimmy Hoffa, who had so much power as a union leader, and he forced the hand. And Hoover, his whole career, 48 years, think of all the presidents, attorney generals, he lied to America repeatedly and under oath in testimony to Congress. There is no such thing as the mafia in America. His way of eradicating crime was to deny it. And he repeated it over and over. And there was 2 times early in Hoover's career in which promises were made to people to assist the FBI, and he didn't hold up his end. And for that reason, again, America paid a price. For 25 years, no one in organized crime would turn state's witnesses. When the law is worse than the criminals, you stay away from it. Bobby Kennedy turned that around because there was a man by the name of Joe Valachi, who was a New York mafioso, and he wouldn't deal with Hoover like no one else would, but Bobby Kennedy made promises to him that he would be protected. Ultimately, that led to the secret witness protection program. And then Kennedy made Hoover accept it, but Hoover couldn't admit he'd been lying about the mafia, so his part of the deal was that Valachi and Kennedy would call it La Cosa Nostra, and therefore this was a new organization and they were going to go after it. Oh. So a lot of games were played, and the Kennedys, of course, did not fire him, but Bobby pushed him and finally got him going after organized crime. It didn't last after Kennedy was gone, but this is a very interesting thing I put in my book because of my orientation to the Nevada gaming industry. In the 15 years after Hoover's death, the FBI, under successive leaders, completely eradicated any organized crime from the casino industry, and it's very rare a law enforcement agency does that. Afterwards, they showed it could be done, but he wouldn't touch any of it.
Yeah, we were there to see the exorcism. It was, Bobby Kennedy had started it. They had him doing wiretaps and everything. But it took a long time to get those guys and squeeze them out of Las Vegas. They still make occasional forays, and they come in different guises and forms, but they're pretty much gone. You also mentioned about Hoover that he turned this agent Melvin Purvis into sort of this mythical crime buster guy, and it was all just kind of made up.
Well, they started at early in the. This is all in the very early FBI. Purvis was very close to Hoover. They liked each other, and everything was cool. But you got to remember that Hoover planned to be America's top crime buster. And now Purvis has an ego, and he's in the Chicago office, and he goes after Dillinger, and he's getting all of this newspaper press, and it's really upsetting Hoover, and he tells him to tone it down, but this man is on his own trip, and they get in conflicts about all the credit he keeps claiming. So now Hoover sends him to Cincinnati, which was a quiet office, to get him out of the way. And lo and behold, Pretty Boy Floyd ends up in the area. So Purvis, through sheer luck, they're searching for Floyd, have no idea where he is except he's been seen in the neck of the woods. And they run into a police car. And they said, have you heard anything? They said, yeah, we were at a home and got a phone call. Remember, there was no radio cars back then. And so they'd call in and they said, we made a phone call and we know where he is, follow us. So they get in on the killing of Floyd, and he takes all the credit for it. So Hoover is beside himself, sends him back to Chicago, takes someone from the Home Office in Washington, puts him over it, doesn't tell the public that, but makes it clear, the secretary to Purvis a few years later wrote a series of articles in the Chicago Daily Tribune, and she described what happened, and they made him a desk jockey and just destroyed his self-respect. And the day they went out after Babyface Nelson, 4 different groups of pairs of FBI agents went out, and he wanted to join the head people, and they said, no, you stay here. Well, 2 of those FBI agents were shot to death, and Purvis goes to the hospital, and he comes out, and he says that the head man told him, get this guy, and he said, I promised on his deathbed that I would get Babyface Nelson, yet the doctor in charge testified that the man who Purvis claimed said that never regained consciousness, couldn't talk to anybody. So these 2 were just in a personality war of who was America's top cop, and afterwards Purvis goes and creates an organization for children based on that. Post Toasties had a weekly cartoon ad covering half a page of Elvin Purvis's things. It was just a comedy of these 2 men trying to outdo each other in the press as America's top crime buster.
You mentioned in the last hour about this Kansas City massacre that sort of started the ball rolling with the creation of the FBI. And Kansas City figures in your book in several different ways, but it's central to the overall story. And part of that deals with political corruption there, this machine that was in operation in Kansas City that eventually has ties to the White House. Tell that part of the story.
Well, we have to go back again to what was in the era. Today we have primary elections. Back then, we had a Republican Party and a Democratic Party, an official party. In some major cities, there was a committee, but in the vast majority, it was one man, boss rule, and he had complete control because no one could, like today, I'm going to run on a Republican or Democratic candidate, that you couldn't do it. They had to appoint you. And they only had one candidate, and they supplied all the funds back then, whole different system. So when the public voted in the general election, each party gave them a choice, and they took it. Well, these men had incredible power, and they were called political machines, and they were. And if you were on the inside, you benefited greatly. And if you were on the outside, you had trouble being heard. Well, the standard way these operated was all of them, I may be going too far, almost all of them were closely tied to organized crime in this era. Once Prohibition came, and these guys had all this money, they could, 1, donate large amounts, but the second thing is they could intimidate the voters. And in many cities, when people went to vote, they were told by these thugs, you let me watch who you mark up or you can't vote. And in return for turning over the vote in their districts, they didn't go outside their territories. They were all in the lower income areas. That's where the street crimes, street gangs developed. They would turn over the election to whoever they chose, but in return, the typical thing was they were either allowed a wide open illegal casino or brothel in that district that the police wouldn't touch for the term of the person they put into office. And this went across the country. Kansas City was the most unique thing there was, and I had to get into it for this reason. With the Kansas City massacre, Hoover decided that Pretty Boy Floyd was one of the shooters. And the evidence was these two things. One, he was known to be in town the night before. He arrived in town the night before the crime. And second, a man that was believed to be a shooter who was local. A Pretty Boy Floyd's lieutenant was with him. His fingerprint was found on a beer glass in the guy's home. So you put a guy you think in Kansas City had something to do with it, and you put this fingerprint, and that was the assumption he made. The reason he was there when the lieutenant was captured, finally, he had a pistol that had been stolen from the Kansas City National Guard Armory. And he was there buying a pistol because he couldn't carry a machine gun on the streets. And he wanted a gun to carry, which was his defense at the time when he was captured. So he took these two things and he assumed it was Floyd. Then a very interesting thing happens. There was a man by the name of Michael LaCapra, who was a very small-time mafioso for the Kansas City Mafia group, and he went under the name Jimmy Needles because he was an addict. He got on the outs with the gang. The investigative reporters of the era, and I would just like to say this, George, back then, the reason why I have so much data is the investigative reporters back then in so many of these major newspapers were so dogged the story and so were after the truth. Unlike the sensationalism we see in some of the news today, they just wanted the facts, and you represent that kind of thing. So I'm really enjoying being able to talk with you tonight. And the investigative reporters said the word out there, and they knew all the hoods, was that he was pressuring them for a better part of the deal in his gang. They decided to get rid of him. They made one attempt on his life, and it failed. He's leaving town, and he's on the highway because he knows they're coming for him, and he's got two girls in the car, and they're driving along, and a car pulls up on their left with three men in it. The driver is controlling the vehicle, of course, and in the passenger seat and the man behind him, they open fire. And it becomes a high-speed chase, and fortunately for LaCapra, they speed off the road and get stalled. He saw a police station in the last town they were in. He races to it, runs in, says, "I'll admit to any crime, lock me up." So they put him under a crime of suspicion for something, put him in a jail cell. Now the highway patrol finds the stuck car. And understand, the police know nothing. They haven't heard about a shooting. It happened out in the open, open from anywhere. And they don't know anything that's been going on, and so they try to help the people and find the guns and arrest them. They take these three guys and put them in the cell next to Jimmy Needles. Well, when they leave, these guys start explaining in detail how they're going to kill him. He takes a number of hours of this till he finally becomes hysterical, tells the police to get the FBI. He can solve the Kansas City massacre. So they take and put him in the only isolated cell they had, which was the death room, which must have been a horrible imagery for this guy. And he's waiting for the FBI to show up. They show up, and the story he gives them, he's a small guy, but his brother, who's already dead, told him the following facts, he claims. Now, that's always dangerous. You have to be very careful. In a court of law, it's tough because you can't interrogate the guy if you're on the defense. But if you're a legitimate prosecutor, you've got to be careful, because when you go after the details and facts, it says whether this guy's telling the truth. He says, well, that's what my brother told me. We know today he was lying. I've proven that without question. He gave several statements that can be absolutely proven to not be true. He was making it all up. He was telling Hoover what Hoover wanted to hear. And at that point, from then on till the records today, they still say that the Floyd people did it. To find out who did it, I went on an enormous research project into Kansas City, and I had to get into the political and mafia machines to show how the town really acted to get down to what happened. And what you've got now, getting back to the political machine, it was a 40-year phenomenon, and there was 3 members of the Pendergast family who were Irish. And back when it was created, it was an Irish neighborhood. They were, I've got to step back a second. In each generation, we get different people immigrating to America. They have no money when they get here for the most part, and they tend to be from only certain ethnic groups, which changes with each generation. They were Irish at that point. They came into this area, and the first Pendergast took over, and then his brother took over from him. And they developed this democratic machine in this Irish area. They had enough votes that they became the most potent part of the Democratic Party. And they controlled the town. And they were very, very effective at what they did. They knew that these people wanted someone that represented their interests. And they did good things for individuals. If someone needed coal for the winter, if someone needed food, they'd deliver baskets. Every one of the Pendergast representatives that were out there had a pocket full of cash, and if someone said, I'm having problems, boom, came the cash. They helped in many ways, and they expected them to vote for them. But they took so much more than they gave. For example, the Pendergast owned something called the Ready Concrete Company. It got virtually every city and county construction job. And you're talking about a lot of money here. And he ran his political machine out of those offices. They also did a lot of illegal deals where if a businessman gave him a lot of support, his property taxes went down. If a guy opposed him, his property taxes went up. So they knew how to milk the people, but it doesn't mean they were nice or legal. But they controlled the party. Now, something happened in this situation that never happened in any other American city.
I'll tell you what, you have to hold that. It's a terrible place to break. Bill Friedman, sorry to interrupt you right at that key moment, but you were just about to tell us something that had never happened before. What was it?
And now we bring the mafia in because when Pendergast had taken over, this was an Italian area, but it was late in its development, and these people were getting better jobs and moving out, and the new group coming in was Italian. And along with this came a mafioso by the name of Johnny Lazia. And he was the man during Prohibition, and he now had control of the voters directly. And he cut a deal with Pendergast that this would remain his territory, and he would deliver the vote, and he didn't have any political agenda, but he wanted one thing that no other organized crime figure ever got in this country. Instead of having the brothel or the casino or some other special thing like that, he demanded the right to select who would be the chief of police and who would be the detectives. Nothing like that's happened. It was as awful as you can imagine. It was so bad that the state of Missouri, the legislature, passed a special law applying only to Kansas City, that there would be a 5-man police commission that would appoint all of the employees of the police department from the chief on down, and the 5 men would be appointed by the governor. Well, Lazia didn't let that slow him down. He just spread out his influence to more of the state, but in addition, he stuffed, and this was proven, hundreds of people went to jail for it, not for making an extra vote. They went to long-term prison sentences. They stuffed in each election tens of thousands of false ballots in Kansas City so that they had enough votes to overwhelm the St. Louis, the second biggest city, and the rural areas. And this was a nightmare. During Prohibition, it was said in the national press that it was the only town in America where no one ever knew there was Prohibition because there was no limits whatsoever. Well, in the media, both locally and nationally, the mafia chieftain was never called a gangster, a mafioso. He was the political lieutenant of the Pendergast machine. If you were a Democrat, you called him a political leader, the newspaper, and if it was a Republican newspaper, they called him a political boss. That was the nastiest thing they could say. Well, in studying this situation, I did solve the massacre, but what became very interesting in reading paper after paper all those years is Harry Truman was developed by this machine. He had been a leader of a unit, an artillery unit in the First World War in France. And one of the men under his command was the son of Pendergast. Well, Truman came back, and he went broke as a haberdasher, and there was a family farm that struggled, and of course this actually helped him with the people because this was the Depression and businesses and farms were having trouble. He was a man of the people and understood them. Well, he was elected by the Pendergast machine because of this relationship to become what was called a county judge. It was Jackson County, and it was called a judge. In most of the country, we call this a county commissioner. It had nothing to do with the law. He spent a number of years there, was very loyal to them. There's no evidence whatsoever that he ever pocketed anything, but he was loyal to bad people. And he did this for a number of years, and then he saw a position open in which he could make more money than he was making, and he went to Pendergast, and he said, I'd like to get to run for this position because it would help my family. And Pendergast looked at him, and he said, well, I'm sorry, but the only thing I have open for you is a U.S. senatorship. Do you want it or don't you? So he went from county commissioner to U.S. senator, and he was in his second term as U.S. senator when he became the fourth and final vice president on the ballot for
FDR.
FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt was getting weaker and weaker from polio, and Truman did all the campaigning and won that election. And 3 months later, Truman became president. Now, Truman always remained loyal to this group. But this was the incredible part. Not only has no other president been involved with organized crime or sold out, but the whole last chapter of my book is the interactions between this mafioso and the president because the president had the same problem of deadlock that we have today. It was a Republican Congress, and they didn't like his domestic policies, and they were blocking everything. And there was a Democratic representative in Kansas City, or in Kansas City, who voted with the Republican bloc because he disagreed too. And the president wanted him replaced with a loyal Democrat. He dealt with the mafia chieftain, and he said, you stuff the ballot boxes and put in somebody else. And they were dealing as a partnership for a while. But this one, remember, this has been going on for decades. This mafia chieftain was now Charles Binaggio, and he thought, why should I answer to someone that doesn't even live in this part of the community? And he very quietly, over a few years, developed his own political machine with the people and challenged the Pendergast. And he also then ran his own slate of Democrats into the primary, so we no longer just had one vote. Well, the president was furious, and he ordered a IRS investigation, which, of course, there should have been one, but he had his own motives, and these two go to war with each other. And this is the war between them, and all this political jockeying going on from the White House to this mafioso until one day the mafioso is shot to death in his Democratic party headquarters on Truman Road, and a picture's flashed across America of this man sprawled out under a huge portrait of the president. Well, the Republicans, the next day in both the Senate and the House, I mean, this was wide open, everybody knew about this, they literally accused the President of the United States of having ordered his political henchmen to kill him. Now, that wasn't true, of course, but it was incredible politics. In the meantime, Estes Kefauver was a new senator who wanted to do a crime investigation, and nobody in Congress wanted it, but nobody wanted to be anti-law enforcement, so they kept his proposal bottled up, because across the country, in certain cities, the Democratic machine was tied up to the organized crime. In other cities, the Republicans were. For example, Al Capone, that was totally a Republican machine. Both of them were guilty. None of them won an investigation. Once this happened, nobody could stop it, and we end up with Congress investigating the local crime. They didn't learn anything in Kansas City, but it was the greatest crime investigation ever that came out of this. And this is the story of this back and forth between them. And the most incredible part of the story is the president learned about what he thought was a great business opportunity. It was going to be a small, privately held business. And the mafioso, he wanted to get out of this pending IRS criminal charge, and he was trying to placate the president finally, and he secretly was investing in the president's company. And I mean, all of this is documented. There's paperwork for everything. It is absolutely incredible what went on between them.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, the story arc. I mean, the tentacles that it has. It's just an amazing tale. How high it led. I want to take a call from one of our listeners east of the Rockies, Michael in Virginia Beach. Hi, Michael. You're on with Bill Friedman.
Thank you. You've done it tonight better than anybody does it. I hope we'll hear part 2 next week, and that all my fellow coast-to-coast listeners will email George to tell him we want Bill Friedman and George Knapp back next week to give us part 2. This is the destiny of our country that's at stake, and this man is giving us the key on how to get it back. We go back to Hoover and the war between him and Bobby Kennedy, and we ask ourselves, is this going on now? We have the 5 leading candidates for the Republican presidential nomination as governors under some form of investigation or indictment right now. Is the Obama Justice Department and FBI being used in a mafia-like fashion to disenfranchise the Republican voters of this country? I ask you that, Bill Friedman.
You know, I'm a historian, and I have to wait until this information comes out. So I can't comment on what's going on today, but your point, which I think is so critical, the thing that all this information says, Congress, when they create a secret organization, they have to give it very clear guidelines under the law, clear restrictions under the law, and then vigilantly account for everything they do. And if they don't, yes, the government can use them, but they can go off on their own. And both of them are frightening, and I think there should be enormous focus on that.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Did you want to continue that?
Our friends...
Go ahead, Michael.
Well,
yes.
We here in Virginia Beach are friends of former Governor Bob McDonnell, and it looks to us here who have known this man for all of his political life, it looks to us here like somebody got paid a $10 million bribe to go to be the number one witness against the McDonald's. It looks like a frame-up. There doesn't seem to be any crime here as we see it.
I think you raise interesting questions, but I think it's beyond the scope of what Bill was prepared to talk about tonight. But thank you for the call. I appreciate it. I guess maybe what Michael was sort of leading toward was whether or not anything similar goes on today. As far as your book goes, Bill, you sort of lead up to the exorcism of the mob from Las Vegas, and there's certainly nothing like what it was in the 70s and 80s, but it took a heck of a long time to get those guys out of there. The Mafia, La Cosa Nostra, whatever you call it. As you note, a lot of the old-time guys, the bootlegger interests, sold out to different mobsters who, they persisted. I mean, they hung on for a long time. It was hard to get them out of there.
Yeah, Hoover didn't try, and after him it was extremely difficult. The state couldn't do anything because there's always been a state law that even law enforcement cannot wiretap, and the FBI finally did it through wiretaps and state witnesses, and again, in many of these cases, luck plays a role. One man, they went in and in one of the main cases that they made, they raided one man's home, and he'd kept accounting records of everything.
Right.
And
Kansas City
so
guy, right?
It's just tough. I mean, in organized crime, if they keep their mouths shut and don't keep paperwork, it's very hard to link them into it. That's why I complimented the FBI to be able to finally, ultimately do it. But it was a tremendous, difficult task.
You know, you mentioned about Nick Savella and the influence they had with the Teamsters Fund, which gave money to so many casinos in Las Vegas. And the reason that the town was crying out for it is because casinos couldn't borrow money from banks. That was their bank.
Yeah, it was a tainted industry, and until the corporations finally took over and proved they could run it. The legitimate financing institutions, one, were afraid of just the imagery of organized crime, but the other thing was they they were uncomfortable with people who wanted to be in Nevada but hadn't proven they could operate a casino. And yeah, interestingly, the history of Nevada is up until the 80s. One of the key things is the source of revenue. We're talking about what went on then, but even in earlier eras, it was a constant struggle to find people who would loan, and the irony is they paid the highest rates. In other words, if you were in the casino business, because of the supposed risk, you paid a higher rate, and except for a few places that were poorly run, they all paid. It was a tremendous investment.
Well, the mob had to go for Las Vegas to bloom and blossom into what it is today, and it's fabulous on many levels. But there are, as you know, longtime Las Vegans and Nevadans who yearn for a day, not necessarily when the mob ran casinos, but when the town was smaller, when there were places like the ones that you ran, the Silver Slipper, the Castaways, that were friendly to locals, that were good bargains. I mean, it's a different Las Vegas. It's great on many levels, but it sure is different. Don't you agree?
Oh, yes. Back in the era where I learned and I operated, this Las Vegas was purely a gambling town. It was a resort. Every department except for the rooms and the casino lost money. It was to drive the casino. The casino had the greatest share of revenue, the greatest share of profit. And with the mega resort, it became a convention town. And today, the casino is a minor player in that.